Welcome back to Only Talk Sports. We talk sports every single day, or at least we try to. I'm your host, Jeffrey, and subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Hit that notification bell so you never miss another video. Now, in the Pac-12 on Saturday, there's a game between two rivals. It's the 40th anniversary of the play, with the Stanford Cardinal traveling on the road at the California Golden Bears. Who do I think is going to win this game? Let's break it down. Now, Stanford is 3-7 and 1-7 in the Pac-12 to start the season. And David Shaw, one of the most respected coaches in college football. He did a great job at Stanford at the beginning of his tenure after taking over for Jim Harbaugh. But unfortunately for David Shaw, Stanford has really fallen from where they used to be. They are not getting the players that they used to. A lot of it has to do with NIL. A lot of it has to do with the transfer portal. But Stanford is really struggling, and they're struggling this season. They beat Colgate in Week 1, 41-10. That was a good win. But then they lost to USC, 41-28. Lost at Washington, 40-22, and lost at Oregon, 45-27. And all three of these games were tough for Stanford to even compete in. They did try in all three games, but they just could not really compete, and they lost all three. Then they lost to Oregon State, 28-27. This was a close loss. They almost beat the Beavers, but they couldn't get it done. But then they beat Notre Dame on the road, 16-14. This was a shocking win. Notre Dame, even though they've struggled a little bit this season, that was a big win for Stanford. And then they beat Arizona State 15-14. That was a good close win. But now they've lost three straight again. They lost at UCLA 38-13. They lost to Washington State 52-14, and they lost at Utah 42-7. And Stanford is just not really competitive right now, and they're really struggling on both sides of the ball. Quarterback Tanner McKee in the Utah game had 155 yards and a rushing touchdown. He's a good quarterback, and a lot of people think he has NFL potential. He's got big size. He's 6'6". He can make a lot of throws. But unfortunately for Tanner McKee, whether he works out in the NFL or not, the problem is at Stanford, the offensive line is not what it was when Christian McCaffrey and Bryce Love and Andrew Luck were at Stanford, and Stanford cannot protect Tanner McKee, and that is the biggest problem that Stanford has on offense, and he gets sacked a lot. Running back Mitch Leagbird, 40 yards, and wide receiver Elijah Higgins at 105 yards for Stanford against Utah, and Stanford is having a hard time running the football, but at least their passing game can get some things going. And on the defensive side of the ball, safety Jonathan McGill, 4 tackles and an interception, and linebacker Lance Kennelly had 2 tackles for Stanford against Utah. And Stanford's defense is having a hard time stopping the best offenses in the Pac-12. They're trying, but they're just not really doing a great job on offense or defense, and that's why Stanford is really struggling. Now, on the California side, they're 3-7 and 1-6 in the Pac-12 to start the season. Justin Wilcox, he's been at California for a few seasons, and he's really struggling to get things going. He's kind of on the hot seat. He needs to win more, but this year has not given California fans the result that they want, and California's really struggling. They beat UC Davis 34-13 in Week 1, and then they beat UNLV 20-14. Both were good wins against inferior competition, but they've struggled since. They lost at Notre Dame 24-17 in a game that they were kind of competitive in against Notre Dame. And again, Notre Dame's really struggling, especially at the beginning of the season when Cal and Stanford played them, but Cal couldn't pull out the win. Then they beat Arizona 49-31 in a game that they were able to run all over Arizona's defense. It's not very good. But then they've lost every game since. They lost at Washington State 28-9. They lost at Colorado in overtime 20-13. This was a bad loss because Colorado's the worst Pac-12 team in the conference, and unfortunately for California, they are the only ones to lose to them. And then they lost to Washington 28-21. Then they lost to Oregon 42-24. And then they lost at USC 41-35. And all these games, at least California was fairly competitive in. They kept a lot of these games close, and that's not bad results there, but you have to get wins. And then they just lost at Oregon State 38-10. In this game, they were not competitive in. And you don't want to say that California's throwing in the towel, but both these teams just are really struggling right now. And as the season's gone along, you can just see their fight dwindling. And in that Oregon State game, quarterback Jack Plummer had 147 yards and interception. He's the transfer quarterback from Purdue, and he's been solid. I think Jack Plummer's a decent quarterback, but unfortunately, same thing with Tanner McKee. California's offensive line is terrible, and they're not protecting Jack Plummer. If Jack Plummer had more time, you saw what he did at Purdue. He's a pretty decent quarterback, but he has not been able to do what he did at Purdue at California because he's not being protected. Running back Jay Nott at 20 yards for California against Oregon State. He's a very talented running back, but the only game he was able to explode in was the Arizona game because Arizona's defense is horrible, but California has not been able to open up rushing lanes for Jay Nott, but he is a very talented freshman. And wide receiver Jeremiah Hunter, 63 yards for California against Oregon State, decent wide receiver for California. And on the defensive side of the ball, linebacker Femi Oladeo at 8 tackles, and safety Daniel Scott at 4 tackles for California against Oregon State. And California's defense has talent on it, but again, as the season's gone along, they're playing so many great offenses that you can just start to see them wear down. They still have a decent amount of talent on the California defense, and they have been kind of solid at times this season, but their defense is starting to wear down, and California's offense is just really struggling to get anything going because they cannot protect Jack Plummer and get rushing lane for Jay Knott. So who do I think is going to win this game? Both teams are really struggling right now. They're both not bowl eligible, and that really hurts because both teams don't really have anything to play for, but you do have something to play for. Again, it's the 40th anniversary of the play. I'm sure both coaches are telling their team about this game and how important this rivalry game means to Stanford and California. I think that is going to hopefully inspire both of these teams to play really good football in this game. But California does have an advantage because California, it's at home. That's going to help them out a little bit. Stanford has shown that they've been able to upset teams in the past, but they usually do it against better competition, especially against ranked competition. I think Stanford is going to show up to play in this game because of the fact that it is a rivalry game. I think David Shaw is going to get his team ready for this game, and I think they can win. But I think California is going to win this game 24-21. I think California's offense and Stanford's offense are about the same, but I will say the one advantage that California has over Stanford besides the home field advantage is that California's defense has been a little bit better than Stanford's defense. Both offenses are very similar, but California's defense has a little bit of an edge over Stanford's defense, and I think California is going to be able to find a way with Justin Wilcox at head coach that they're going to show up in this game. They're not going to completely throw in the towel, and they're going to be able to beat David Shaw's Stanford team in a very close one in this rivalry game, 24-21. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Like this video down below. Comment down below whether you think Stanford or Cal is going to win this game and why, and I will see you next time.